Okay, we are starting on page 16b. Ted Zayin Amud Bet. If you're following the art scroll, 16b2. Let's begin. Part of the Mishnah said that there's certain averot that a person gets a punishment of Malkut for. And then it goes through all the various cases that you get Malkut for, which are a lav, which are a negative commandment. And one of them is Va'ochel nivelot, utrefot, shkatzim, veramazim. What's a nivela? Nivela is an animal that did not have shechita done on it. So you shot an animal in the head, that's a nivela. Okay, so non-kosher meat would be nivela. Terefa is when the animal does not have a strong enough sense of health to be able to survive at least 30 days. So that's taref. So you can have an animal where nobody checked or it doesn't have health, and then they killed it without shechita, so then it's nivela utrefa. Okay? Nivela, trefa, shkatzim, veramasim. Shkatzim, veramasim represent creepy crawlies, and we'll see exactly what that means. Now, before we begin, I want you to take a look in the notes on the side, because this is very important. Okay, let's just take a look. You see down on the left side. There are a series of pisukim that describe the concept of shkatzim v'ramasim. Shkatzim v'ramasim is, as we mentioned, is creepy crawlies, and it's telling us that these bugs, or whatever they might be, these insects, are forbidden to eat. So let's look carefully. Don't make yourselves abominable, that's a lashon sheketz, right? By eating these abominable things. Sheretz hashoretz, this crawler that crawls, okay? Now, it doesn't tell us anything about it. It just tells us that it creeps or crawls. The second pasuk that we find in Torah is, V'lo tetameu b'hem. You should not become impure by eating those things. So we have two negative commandments with regards to any crawling thing. Now, the Torah then tells you a separate pasuk. Look at this. Anything which doesn't have fins and scales. So any fish that doesn't have fins and scales. But then it says mikol sheretz hamayim. From anything that crawls or that wriggles, okay, in the sea. So obviously, unless it's on the seabed, it's not going to creep or crawl. But you could have something that wriggles in the ocean. All right.
What do you mean by that?
Sorry.
What do you mean by that?
So the motion of something that's creeping or crawling,
It's always
it's a form of movement. Okay, as opposed to specifically using legs to crawl on the earth. So you could have an insect, if you will, of the sea, and it's described by the way that it moves. Okay, so if you have a sheret hamayim, mibsaram lo tochelu. Now this is not referring to random fish that don't have the signs. This is referring to, aside from it being a non-kosher fish, is there an element of sheret hamayim? Okay, so now the Torah tells you can't eat sheret hamayim. It also falls under the category of something in the water that doesn't have fins and scales. Okay, so let's say as an example, shrimp, right? Shrimp does not have fins and scales, but it's also a crawler. Okay, the movement that it makes, it doesn't swim. All right, it slithers, if you will, through the water. Okay, so
actually, I'm sorry. It actually brings me to a question that I heard recently.
yeah,
There's one fish. Forgot if it's a sturgeon or something else, but it has fins and scales. But when you take it out of the water, it
loses the fins and scales.
Well, one of them with the scales.
Yeah,
Does that count?
loses the scales. Yeah.
Does that count as it's kosher because when it's in its living environment, it has its fins and scales?
Huge sugya.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not something we want to get involved in,
Okay.
because it's a sugya in understanding what is the Torah telling us when it tells us about scales, etc., etc.
Only because here it says when it's in its water, it has fins and scales.
Correct, and it seems that is why those opinions hold that doesn't count for that exact reason that you said. Okay,
What doesn't count?
that the fins that it has when it comes out of the scales that it does not have out of the water is okay because it says in the water. That is the logic of that opinion. Okay, so now let's say I ate something. So as an example, I have a general two that talk about all shratzim. So those two would seem to apply to anything that falls under the category of a sheretz. Now the Torah gave you two more that tell you a sheretz in the mayim, right? What is that it's asur in the Torah. Then continue on. Then the pasuk says, when it comes to shratzim that are not in the water but are on the land, chol sheretz hashoretz al haaretz, an animal that crawls, a creeping, crawling thing on the land. Sheketz ulo tochel. Kol olech al gachon. Now again, another pasuk. Kol olech al gachon, kol olech al arba. Anything that goes on its belly, or that walks on 4 feet. Ad kol marbe raglaim, or that has many legs, like a centipede, or a caterpillar. Chol sheretz hashoretz al haaretz lo tochel minal reitem. Third pasuk. Don't make yourself impure with any crawler on the earth. And then finally, the last thing is something that flies. So let's review. We have 2 that are general. We have 2 in the water. We have 3 on the ground. And we have 1 that flies. So altogether, how many commandments would there be? Negative commandments, right? Regarding all different types of shratzim, 8. Okay? So obviously, you'll have some that will be only 1 or a combination of the bunch. So says the Gemara, now we're going to interact with this idea. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, binita de if someone eats a worm that lives in a krav. Krav is like a cabbage or coleslaw with kruv, okay? Malkina le mishum sheretz hashoretz al haaretz. He gets malkut because of sheretz hashoretz al haaretz, a crawling thing that is on the earth, okay? Hahuda achal binta de bekrava, and someone ate one of these cabbage worms. V'nagde Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda gave him malkut. Now, there's a whole hullabaloo over here, because the question is, what is Rav Yehuda teaching us? It's a worm. We know the halakha. Why did you need? You have to have Rabbi Yehuda tell you? It's a pasuk. The Mishnah told us that you get malkut for eating a creepy crawly, a worm.
It's for not being careful.
But again, the point is, in order to get malkut, what do we say? You have to be warned.
Yeah.
The guy needs to know that there's a worm there. He needs to eat it on purpose. He needs to have the warning beforehand. And if he has all of those things, he'll get malkut. So why do I need Rabbi Yehuda to tell me something that's already in the Mishnah? It's already in the pasuk. So there's there obviously is some sort of chidush in this bekrava. So there's Rashi and Tosafot. So let's just deal with the first simple understanding. There's a machloket as to a sheretz, a worm, that is in a fruit that never emerged from the fruit. So how could that be? I mean, it can't be created in the fruit. So what happens? The mother goes into the fruit, plants the egg. The baby now is born there in the apple, wherever, and now it never left. So was that ever shoretz al haaretz? It never touched the earth, ever. So the Gemara says as follows. Shmuel taught that fruit, if it was attached to the ground, right, is when the sheretz is walking in the fruit, while it's growing from a tree attached to the ground, that's already called sheretz hashoretz al haaretz. So where would this case be relevant? Where you bought a fruit, it's sitting on your counter, it's not attached. They add the sheretz puts an egg inside of it. Now the worm never left the fruit.
No, but a worm went in to begin with.
But that one left. Mom goes in, plants the egg, leaves. Now the baby's in it. The baby's never seen the light of day. Okay, this worm. It's sitting around in the fruit. Why should it leave? Perfect life right now. Okay? Now you eat the fruit. Is that sheretz a shoretz al haaretz? So Shmuel says yes. That's what he holds. Sorry? What do you mean?
The sheretz of haaretz is the one that got it.
No, the question is, would you call detached fruit haaretz? It's a very good question. Because it's not attached to the earth.
You're also taking it extremely literal.
Sorry?
You're taking it extremely literal.
Well, that's what that pasuk says.
Right.
And in fact, the differentiations are differentiated by where did it sheretz? Where did it crawl? It crawled in the earth. It crawled in the water. It was shoretz. It crawled in the sky. Right? Okay. So the chidush is that Rabbi Yehuda is telling you, first of all, that I rule like Shmuel, and number two, that the stringency that Shmuel said that a bug in a fruit is considered to be ala aretz, it's not that he was being machmir midrabanan, because if it was from the Ram midrabanan, he couldn't have given him lashes. So Rabbi Yehuda is telling you two things, two chidushim. Number one, I hold like Shmuel, halacha. Number two, it's not a stringency. Shmuel held that actually is a fulfillment of al aretz. Why is this? What would be the relevance? Just skip forward to right now. Right now, the nafkamina is, let's say I have an apple, and the apple has a bug in it, and and I eat that bug, and I knew it was in there. The halacha would be that you get malkut for that if you got what's it called? If you got warned about it, okay? So we have to be very careful, of course, when it comes to certain things. Why are you allowed to just eat a peach?
What do you mean?
Why don't I have to assume or worry that every fruit has bugs in it?
Because it grows on the trees.
So what?
I don't know. I thought we were talking about ground.
Now the bugs also get into the things on the trees. That's why we spray these things with pesticides. Why am I not obligated to worry? So that's just an interesting thing. There's a differentiation that's made between something which is matsui, which is commonplace, and something which is, very rare. I don't have to assume that there's going to be a bug in an apple that I can't see a hole in. If there's a hole in it, that's something else. Because what do you mean? The hole, it's clear, something burrowed in there. Okay? But if I don't see a hole in the apple, why do I have to assume there's a bug there? Not every apple I ever ate has a bug in it.
Okay.
But there's certain things that always have bugs. Dates always have bugs. That's why you have to check it. Strawberries always have bugs. That's why you can't just eat a strawberry. Strawberry needs to be, there's a way to eat them if you want. You have to cut off the top. You soak them in water with a little bit of soap in it. Okay? The bugs will come out. And again, if you ever thought that this was just rabbis going crazy, Google strawberries, bugs. You'll never eat a strawberry again. It's wild. Okay? So there's certain fruits that you just can't eat. Raspberries, as an example, right, always will have bugs. And not only will they have bugs, it's almost impossible to check raspberries. Is it possible? Yes. But the procedure is so ridiculous that just you don't eat them. The only raspberries I've eaten in the last, I don't know how many years, have been dried raspberries for that reasons. I used to love raspberries. Now, is it possible to make raspberries that are clean? Yes.
Not just rinse underwater.
Not just rinse underwater. They don't come out. And it's a fruit that has so many cracks and crevices that they just go in there and then they just stay. And even when you wash it doesn't come out. So someone said to me, Rabbi, I'm very strict with kosher. You got to find me a way. I love raspberries. Anyway, I did the research. I came back to him. I told him exactly how to do it. You do it. You grow it hydroponically. You could grow it in your house. You cover it with a thrip cloth. It's a very thin cloth. And then when you do it, you water it. You take off the cloth. And you anyway, the guy's like, forget it. I'm not eating it.
That's like, I'm done.
No, you can't. You can't. Right? So, just as an example, now what do some people do? What some people do is sometimes you see that they have raspberries with a hechsher. How do you have like a kosher caterer that has like a cheesecake that has raspberries on it? A lot of times they're not fresh raspberries. What are they doing? They're freeze drying them, and then they're adding water again to them. Why? How does that help? Because when you freeze dry the bug not only does it kill it, it takes away from the full measure of the bug.
What does that mean?
We'll come to it not. It's not about the dimensions. We'll come back to it in just a minute. Okay. Still a bug. So how does that help? Good question. We're going to come to it in just a minute. But that's a lot of times what they're doing. Fresh raspberries, blackberries, those fruits that are made that way. It used to be that it was almost impossible to get kosher kale. Why? Because think of the leaves and how it has that they're so hard to get in and everywhere. To check, it's almost impossible. Now, if it's grown hydroponically, there's certain ways to be able to create these things. But if you have to expect that something has a bug because the number of times that it has a bug is so high that it's considered matsui, it's generally found that way, so that a person can't eat it because you know what's happening. Would you get lashes, though?
Knowingly.
No. Yeah, it's knowingly, but I don't see this. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Nathan is saying in the chat that once you dehydrate it exactly correct, it's no longer an entire biriyah. It's no longer a complete creation. We'll see what that means because we haven't explained what that means yet. Let's see the Gemara. Gemara says, Amar Abaye taught, Achal putita, if a person ate a water bug, okay, Loke arba'a, he gets 4 lashes. Why? Because you have the 2 general. Then you have the two Pesukim that say you can't eat Sheretz Hamayim. So two Sheretz, which it doesn't tell you where they are, so that applies to any. Two, which applies, so there's 4 Isurim. Now there's a Machloket and Rishonim. When we say you get 4 Malkut, do we mean that we actually give you 4 sets of lashes? Or do we mean that we give you 1 set of lashes for 4 Averot? Rambam holds you only get 1 set. Most other Rishonim hold no. You did 4 Averot, you get 4 different sets for each time the Torah commanded it. However, definitely you see how strict it is. Now, Nimala, what happens if a person ate Nimala, which is an ant, regular ant, Lokeh, Hamesh, you get 5 lashes. 5 different Malkut. Why? 2 regular, and remember, how many Pisukim were there that dealt with land crawlers? 3. So 2 and 3 is 5. Says the Gemara,
What about the Lota Tameu?
Pnei Sheretz HaShoretz ala Aretz. Sorry?
Lota Tameu. Each one of those is a Tameh issue on top of it. No, the 8th one?
No, because the 8th one is for the ones that fly.
Sorry, the 7th one.
Yeah?
Lota Tameu et nafshotechem b'chol Sheretz HaLamet Haaretz.
Yeah,
the
that's
third one?
that's part of the third. Yeah, that's the third. Okay. Tzirah, says the Gemara. What about a hornet? Okay, so it has legs. It crawls walks on the earth, and it flies. So what do you got? You got the 2 general, 3 land, plus the 1 that that covers the ones that fly. Says the Gemara. Now that we've discussed this idea of eating sheratzim, which the pasuk said is considered an abomination, Amar Rav Achai continues, Hamshaet nekevav, someone who needs to go to the bathroom but holds it in, he's busting. Over mishum lo tishaktu. It's an isur in the Torah. You're not allowed to hold back your bodily functions. It's lo tishaketzu. It's considered something which is disgusting. Not only that, Amar Rav Bibi bar Abaye, Rav Bibi, son of Abaye, said, Hayman dishateh bekarna deumana. Let's say you have a guy, they used to take a horn and they would pierce the skin and they would let blood from people. And that was considered to be a practice that would help someone with their health. Bloodletting. All right? It's still practiced in some cultures. Okay? Now imagine you have this horn that has the blood that was let from an animal or from a human being, and now you're thirsty, so you pour a whiskey in there and you drink it. Disgusting. Says Rabbi Bibi bar Abaye, that's also ka'avar mishum lo tishaketzu. Also you're over because of do not do something which is disgusting, which is an abomination. So with the Hidush over here is that these 2 opinions are saying that when the Torah tells you don't do something disgusting, you'd assume that it was specifically talking about something that the Torah itself had designated as disgusting. Says the Gemara, no. Even this, which anybody would find repulsive, disgusting, to drink out of a horn that was used for bloodletting, right? That also is considered about tishakatsu. You're not allowed to do that. To withhold your bodily functions is also considered lo tishakatsu. Now the Gemara goes back to b'shikatzim v'ramasim. Amar Rav Huna said, "Risek tishan nemalim." What if a person ground up 9 different ants? Okay. Now, what is the idea over here? Gemara is basically going to try and deal with a certain issue. Every time the Torah says the word achila, like as an example, it says in the Torah that you should eat matzot. How much matzah do you have to eat?
More than Kazayit.
So why are we saying kazayit? Anytime the Torah says eat in the Torah, what is it talking about?
Kazayit.
When the Torah says ve'achalta ve'savata berachta, what should it mean? If you ate how much bread do you have to make a berkat hamazon? Kazayit. The problem is that the Torah says another word in the middle. It says ve'achalta ve'savata, and you'll be full. So what if I ate the normal amount, but I'm not full? So there it gets a little bit more complicated. But anytime it just says the word achila, in the sukkah you should eat. Well, okay, how much do I have to eat? Anytime it says eat, it says eat is always kazai. So over here, if in the Pisukim that we saw, it said, at least in some of them, it said in the Pisukim, lo tochelu, you should not eat from them. Okay? What word did it use? It used the word achila. Every time we talk about achila, what are we talking about? Kizai, the volume of an olive. 1 ant is not the volume of an olive. So how are you giving me malkut? The Torah said, lo tochelu. Now, the simple answer to that would be, well, okay, fine, but there are other times where the Torah does not use the word lo tochelu. It says lo titameu bahem. So maybe over there, when it doesn't, you should not become impure by ingesting them. It doesn't say don't eat them. So eating is kezayit, but there's times when it doesn't say don't eat them. It says don't become impure by consuming them. It doesn't say the word eat. So we don't have the word kezayit. That's true. But since some of the time it says kezayit, and you're trying to find if you could give the guy 4 malkut or 5 malkut, it means you're using every available pasuk. At least for some of the pasukim, you have to have a kezayit. Ask the Gemara, what happens if I took a bunch of ants, I smashed them up, now I have a little bit less than a kezayit. And what did I do? And I brought one live ant, and that tips the bucket, the hishliman lekezayit, and that gives me a full kezayit. Loke shesh. You get 6 malkut. Why? 5 of them, like we said earlier, for eating an ant. 2 general and 3 of a land sheretz. However, there's one extra one, chamesh mishum birya, 5 of them because you ate that one ant, okay? Ve'echad mishum kizayit nevela, and 1 because you ate an entire kizayit of nevela. And on that we have a separate pasuk that tells us that if you ate a kizayit of nevela, you get malkut for eating that kezayit. Okay? Now, just to be clear, how are you giving me malkut when I eat an ant? At least some of those 5, it says achila. And the answer is, even though it's not a kezayit, and anything which is whole, beriyah, is considered to be chashuv. It's considered to be important. So as an example, if you have a tiny amount of non-kosher, if you have 60 opposite it, what do we say? Batel b'shishim. So, as an example, a little piece of something non-kosher fell into a big vat of something that's kosher. The halakha would be it doesn't make the whole thing non-kosher. In fact, the whole thing is kosher because it's considered nullified 1 in 60. What happens if you have a whole ant? Even if you have 60 keneged, it's not enough. You know why? Because a biryah is something which is whole. You can't take something which is whole and nullify it because it's whole. It's there. It's present. It's chashuv. Interesting. What happens if you have this ant? It falls into the soup. I can't eat it now, but I can't find it.
What if you do find it?
1 minute. 1 second. First, I can't find it. What do I do? If I blend the soup,
Yeah,
the ant's not whole anymore. The ant's not whole. Even if it's broken in half, it's not a whole biryah. So therefore, the regular rules of 60 apply to it. Is that clear?
Yeah.
If you find it whole, you can't say, batel. Why? Because it's whole. If you find it whole, you take it out. Is everything kosher? It cooked now with a fly in it. You took the fly out, right? But the whatever it got, flavor it got from the fly is still in there.
Yeah, so. NG.
But that's not whole. You have 60 keneged, whatever.
If I throw a steak onto-
So then no problem.
Yeah, so if I throw a kosher steak onto a grill that had some NK on it,
Yeah.
besides for the fact that it burnt off at 500 degrees, whatever, it's okay because you don't have, even though you still have flavor, but you don't have the whole item.
It would depend on a case by case basis. Okay. Sometimes it could be, because sometimes it could be not kosher,
How?
but because there's enough flavor in the grill that it's not batel b'shishim.
So what constitutes that?
Usually a very very clear majority of batel b'shishim.
Also, if the entire thing starts to, the majority of the flavor now starts
If you had
to
60,
taste
if you had
bacon-ish.
60 kosher steaks and 1 not kosher steak in there, that would
No,
be,
but he's not asking that. He's asking. So as an example, I cooked chicken soup in a pot.
Right.
The pot is not kosher.
Right.
How much flavor from the pot, how much non-kosher from the pot seeped into the soup?
Right.
If there's 60 times more soup, 60, that's a large number, 60 times more soup than the flavor in the pot, right? Then that would be kosher. Huh? It's not. These are not easy measurements to make. Okay? They're not easy measurements to make.
avoid it.
Yeah, obviously, always easier to avoid by having it be kosher. But there are cases like that. You took a spoon. You took the spoon, it's not kosher, or it's milk, and you stick it into. We're not going to get into all the halachot, but you stuck that milk spoon into a big vat of meat stew.
Okay.
The spoon is this big. The whole volume of the spoon, there's enough in this giant vat to be 60 times the spoon. So the spoon can't make it not kosher. Okay? So generally there's a law of 60, right? When it comes to a whole birya, the birya is chashuv. That's the answer over here too. When you eat a whole thing, how could you give me malkut? It says achila, and achila means kizayit. So why I didn't do anything? Or at least for those pisukim, because the ones that don't say achila, fine, you could get me because it said don't eat the shekets, and I ate the shekets. But at least the one that says achila, I should have to have a kizayit. The answer is that's true. But when I eat the whole ant that's considered chashuv. It's like I had a kizayit. Okay, that's why the Gemara is bringing this case where a guy had enough volume of bugs in it. Now, by the way, I was thinking to myself, what kind of nutcase is sitting there, smushing up ants, like, adding another, what's the guy doing over here? Get a life, get a job. So maybe the answer to this is that the purpose over here was not a guy sitting here mashing ants. We're talking about a scenario that let's say a guy took something that we know it's infested. So now he's chopping it all up because he wants to get out of the problem of having bugs.
His harvest got all jammed, but
Yeah.
he doesn't want to dish it.
Exactly.
Right.
But now that we know that there's that many bugs in it, so if we know that there's enough mushed bugs that make up a kazait, that would be the halacha. The halacha would be that you get malkut for the kazait of bugs.
But if the kazayit is still batel b'shishim.
Hold on one second, just one thing. If you notice in the Gemara says that he has 9 bugs that are smushed, and then he gets 1 live one. Why isn't he 1 live one? Why can't he just have 10 bugs that are smushed, or however many bugs it takes to make up a kazait?
It has to do with the ratio.
Sorry?
It has to do with the ratio.
No, but let's say I had enough volume just of smushed up bugs. Why does it say the last one was live? The shliman lekazait. Why does the last one need to be whole? The answer is because some opinions say that even if I had a kazait, but the Torah never said don't have pate of bug. The Torah said don't eat a bug. So if I don't have at least one whole one, then I didn't eat a bug. I ate a kazait, but I didn't eat the thing I'm supposed to be eating a kazait of. Okay? So, that's the reason why we're talking about a live bug. So the Gemara says you have 6 times, if a person had a shiur of bugs, worth of bugs, that would be the case. By the way, there are things like this that are done on purpose. There are places that will give, certain types of salad, knowing that there are a specific kind of bug in it, and they're adding it on purpose because the bugs give protein. Psycho stuff going on right now. If you want to Google it, you can Google it. And they're trying to make it that you do not have to label that there's bugs in it for the protein, because people are going to be disgusted by the bugs. And it's healthy, and there's no reason why they should be. It's wild stuff going on right now, specifically with this. Okay. Yeah.
When it says like you can grind the ants, is that specifically ants or any bug?
Any bug. We're just using the example of ant because the ant was 5 malkut, and now we wanted to show a scenario where you would get 6, and that would be because now you have this separate isur above and eating the bug itself. You also ate a kazait of that amount, and that's a separate isur. Gemara carries on. Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rava says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Afilu shnaim v'hu. Okay, even if why are you saying 9 bugs? Right, even if there was 2. Why? There's no reason why that you need 9 bugs to make. You don't need minyan to make up this amount. It's even if it's less. Now, why is Rava saying specifically 2 and not 1? Says the Gemara. Rav Yosef, exactly that point. Rav Yosef Amar afilu echad. Right, v'hu. Even if you have 1 and that whole live one, you could have the same 6. V'lo pligi. The Gemara is not arguing between these 2 opinions. All right. Habirav Ravi. One is talking about where the insect is very large. Habizutri, and this is one is talking about where it's very small. So one of them is talking about where the volume is very small, so you need more. One of them is talking about where the volume is medium, so you need two. One of them is talking about whether it's you got the XL ant, and therefore you can have even with one, so long as you have a kazait, that's to mash up into the volume of a kazait. Says the Gemara, Achal tevel u'maaser rishon. The Mishnah continues and says, if a person ate tevel, which means wheat or produce, which did not have separated from it the proper separations for Trumot Masrot. U'maaser rishon. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav achal tevel shel maaser ani. If a person ate tevel of maaser ani, so that means every time you have a certain type of a produce, so the person would have to separate a certain amount and give it to the aniyim. Remember, there's maaser sheni, maaser ani, right? These things that differentiate between the years. We've discussed this already previously on these cases. But whatever the case is, when you have to separate any kind of maaser, so the fruit and the produce, before you've separated Trumot Ra'ah, so what is it called? Tevel. Tevel means something which is just mixed up. It's regular fruit and vegetables, but you're not allowed to eat from it really until you separate from it and put aside the portion that's supposed to go to maaser. So the Gemara says, Achal tevel shel maaser ani. If he ate tevel from maaser ani, that means he didn't separate it yet. Lokeh, he gets malkut. The Gemara says, Kiman, who holds that tevel is considered to be a sudoraita? Ki haitana detanya. The Braita says, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Yachol yechayav elal tevel shelo ramenu kol ikar. I would think that the only time that you have tevel is when none of the things that you needed to separate from it were separated. In other words, all of the obligations of separation were not met. But if you huram mimenu teruma gedola, but if I took already teruma gedola, v'lo huram mimenu maaser rishon, but you did not take maaser rishon, okay? What would the halacha be? Maaser rishon, but I took maaser rishon, but I did not take maaser sheni. So I did two of the separations, but not the third. Afilu maaser ani, or if I did three and not the fourth of maaser ani, the halacha would still be you get malkut. Minayin, right? Why? Now let me explain. What is maaser ani different than the others? The other maasers are for things that only a kohen or a levi is able to eat from. So it's not something that you're allowed to eat from. So I can understand if I ate from something that had a portion that I'm not allowed to eat from, that I would get malkut from that. Maaser ani, the ani is not a kohen, the ani is not a levi. There's no kiddusha to that food. So therefore, I would have thought if it just didn't have maaser ani separated, that you can't give me malkut, because maybe that's the malkut is for the fact that it's something that I was not allowed to be eating because I'm not a kohen or I'm not a levi. Gemara says, Minayin, how do I know if it's just missing maaser ani? Still there's malkut, there's lashes. Talmud lomar lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha. You're not allowed to eat in your gates. Later on, it says when it talks about the maaser ani, and they will eat it in the gates, and they will be satiated. So we have a gezerah shava. We have two words in two different places, the same word that allows us to understand that what it's talking about here, it's talking about over here. Malahalan maaser ani, when it talks about them being satiated, it's talking about maaser ani. So too, afkan, also over here, it says lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha. You can't eat it in your gates. Also, it's talking about a scenario where you did not have maaser ani taken from it. V'rachmana lo tuchal, the Torah said you're not allowed to eat it. So you see that there's a isur in the Torah to eat from that tevel, and therefore you get malkut for tevel that does not have maaser ani taken from it. Amar Rav Yosef kitanai, but Rav Yosef says this is really a machloket tanaim. Rav Eliezer Omer, Rav Eliezer says, a person does not need to separate maaser ani from demai. Demai is something which is mixed up. Okay, like dema, right? The Chachamim hold, no. Koreh et Hashem, right? You specify maaser ani by saying this is maaser ani, but I don't need to separate it. So in other words, in order for it to be eatable, okay, the Chachamim say, the first opinion said, right, en tzarich likrot et Hashem. You don't need to say it, designate by name. The second opinion says, Koreh et Hashem, you need to call it by name. But you don't need to separate it physically. So in other words, if I have 3 apples, I could say, this one's maaser ani, but I don't need to put it on the side. Whereas for the other maasrot, because that's not edible as a Yisrael, I have to set it aside. Okay? Gemara says, "My lab b'hakamifli." Isn't this what they're arguing about? T'masamar vaday tovlo. Right? That the first opinion holds that there's this obligation of separating from maaser, right? Is what makes it tevel. Umasavar vaday eno tovlo. But Rabbi Eliezer holds that the obligation that a person has to separate maaser, even though it does not make it tevel because it's not holy. Okay? Yeah? Does everyone understand? So the opinion that would hold in our Mishnah would be following the opinion of the Chachamim and not Rabbi Eliezer. Right? Amar le Abaye. Abaye said, no. Ihachi, if that's how you learn the machloket of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, that if you do not have Maaser Ani separated, right, then the object becomes tevel, becomes food that you're not allowed to eat from. Ademifleki b'sveki, instead of arguing in a case of a safek, which is a maybe, lifluge, let them argue bevadai, in a case where there's a definite maaser obligation. Right? You understand? Why are they setting their machloket in a case of a safek? Yeah? We should not make the machloket be a case of safek. We should make the machloket be a case of vadai. And if we made it about dubious versus certain, you see, maybe it's not specifically about the case that you're trying to set it up in. Lifluge bevadai. Let them argue in a specific case of maaser ani, which is obligated. Ela the kuli amavadai tovlo. Everybody holds that in the case of demai, right, definite maaser ani makes it tevel. Over here, they're arguing in something else. What are they arguing in? They're arguing masavar lo nechshedu ameh haaretz al maaser ani shel demai. One holds, Rabbi Eliezer holds, that Amaretz, a regular person, a guy who's not very well learned, okay, we do not suspect him on Maaser Ani of Demai, right? Why? Since we know that the Amaretz as well, even though he's not well learned, he's careful with when it comes to Maaser Ani, right? So therefore, we're not worried that it makes it tevel. Kivan de mamona afrush mafrish. Since it's a monetary thing, right? Therefore, they're going to separate it. Rabbanan Sabri, Rabbanan hold kiva de trichale milta. Since it's more difficult for them, lo mafrish. Therefore, we do not separate it. Now, let's just see. Rashi is going to explain to us why that should be the case if it's money or if it's tircha. You see the second wide line, second narrow line. Lo nechshedu. They're not suspect. The mamonahu en bo isurech achila ela gezel anim. The ihu the gezel anim lo chayish. One opinion says that we do not suspect them when it comes to certain things, but when it comes to things that they're not careful with, that's what we're going to suspect them. Afrushe mafrishlu lafkuye tivle nehe the maaser yishon la mafrish tisavari mafrish la lebaina lafrushe turumat maaser mine shu bemita venotna lekohen maaser sheni nami im mafrish la lebeinan asuke v'michla b'Yerushalayim. In all the cases where it causes them a tremendous amount of work, or they're very afraid, so we're not going to suspect them of not being careful. But when it just comes down to the money of the aniyim, they're like, okay, whatever. I gave the guy last week. I gave him when he came to shul. I don't have an obligation to do this. So therefore, therefore, with the Chachamim explained that if you get demai, the person has to designate maaser ani, because we're worried about the fact that if we didn't make you do it, if we didn't render it tevel, that the person would not be careful. Gemara continues. How much of this untithed produce does a person have to eat in order to be able to get malkut? Gemara says, there's a machloket when it comes to wheat. But when it comes to flour, everyone holds that you have to eat kizayit. Right? Now, let's go back to what we said earlier. Let's say I have an entire kernel of wheat. That entire kernel might be less than a olive. Okay? So one opinion in the Chachamim says, since it says over here you have to eat, Therefore, what do you have to eat? You have to eat a kazayit like everywhere else that mount the volume of an olive. The other opinion says that's true. But whenever we talk about a whole object is chashuv. So if I ate a kernel of wheat that was not, the whole kernel, that was not separated ties and trumot ma'asrot from, so that would be enough. That's a machloket rishonim. Says the Gemara, so by a kernel, we have the machloket. Is it a whole thing, so it's chashuv, even if it's not an olive? Or do you have to have an olive's worth? But when it comes to kemach, when it's already ground, so it's no longer a whole thing, when it comes to flour, when it comes to kemach, divrei hakol, everyone agrees, has to be a kezayit. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Shlomo Lakish. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, in the name of Resh Lakish, ki machloket bezu, kach machloket bezu. Nope. The same way there's a machloket in a whole kernel, there's also machloket in the kemach, in the flour. What? What's Rabbi Yirmiyah saying? Look at Rashi. Kach machloket bezu. You see? About 4 lines above the word matnitan. You see it? In Rashi? Kach machloket bezu. The kasavar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds b'chol ha'isurim. In every isur. Kol shuhu lemakot. You get it even when you ate a small amount. V'lo amru kezayit ela inyan korban ashigagat karet. V'alachal Moshe misinayu. Rabbi Shimon holds, no. The only time, you always get malkut. When the Torah says eat, it does not mean kezayit. It means however much you ate. So Rabbi Shimon would hold, if you ate a kernel of wheat, you get malkut. Not an olive. Now we thought that was because it was a beriyah. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah, no. The reason why Rabbi Shimon holds this is because he holds that achilah does not require kezayit ever. Even if you ate a tiny amount of the prohibited item, you get malkut for it. With one exception, where we have, a specific halakha Moshe Misinai with regards to a korban. Okay. The Gemara says, do we hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah that there's a machloket also by kemach or not? Tenan, Amalem, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said, do you not agree with me, Li? If a person eats a small bug, an ant, that he's chayav, you eat the whole ant. Amru lo, yes, we agree with you in that case. Why? Because it is in its full form. Amar lahem, he said to them, afchita achat kibiryata. Rabbi Shimon said, what do you mean? One kernel of wheat is also kibiryata in the way that it was created. Okay? Now, 1 second. Says the Gemara. Chita in. When you have a chita, a whole kernel, yes. Rabbi Shimon said the halacha. Kemach, lo. Rabbi Yirmiyah, you wanted to say that Rabbi Shimon says his law on a minuscule amount in any case, whether or not it's a full biryah. If that's the case, why would Rabbi Shimon have said to the Chachamim, oh, well, a chita is also a biryah? If he holds that even if you ate half a chita, or half a nimala, half an ant, you still would be chayav. Because he holds that you get malkut even when you eat the tiniest amount of something which is forbidden. It sounds from what he's saying that he told them, a chita, you're telling me that an ant, you agree with me because it's whole, so then you should agree with me by a chita also because it's whole. Sounds like Rabbi Shimon is only saying his halacha because it's whole. The Gemara says, no. Lidvarahem kamalu. He said, says the Gemara, I hold that even if you eat half an ant, you're good. But you agree with me that an ant, not an olive, obligates you. Okay, fine. So what about a kernel of wheat? Why are you arguing with me on a kernel? A kernel is also whole. It's also kibiryata in the way that it was created. If that's the case, says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon is not telling you what he holds. He's just saying to the Chachamim, if you agree with me on less than an olive by a whole ant, you should also agree with me on a kernel less than an olive because it's a whole kernel. But I happen to hold even half a kernel. I just know that you're not going to agree with me. So Rabbi Yirmiyah could still be correct, and this Mishnah does not disprove him. Sorry?
The kernel is not at its full form.
What do you mean?
Meaning the kernel is just, at its infancy stage of a wheat.
No.
No?
What does it grow into? A donut?
No, but it's still in its infancy stage.
No, not the seed. When you plant wheat, what grows? You have a stalk, and then what happens at the top? What do you have? Kernel, wheat kernel.
That's the final.
So if I ate a whole wheat kernel, You're right, it's not the whole stalk, but it's the whole it's the whole fruit, okay, of the wheat. So if I eat the whole kernel, but it's less than a kazait, so he says you should agree with me because it's a whole thing. So the Gemara tried to disprove Rabbi Yirmiyah, but answers the Gemara, we have no proof. Maybe he was just saying, according to you, I hold even for kemach, even for flour, the smallest amount obligates you. But according to you, if you agreed with me by an ant, agree with me dechita achat kebeyata v'rabanan. So, how do the Chachamim answer to this? Okay, biyat neshama chashuva. Why did we agree with you for an ant? Not just because it was whole, but because it was whole and it was living. It had a neshama. It had a soul, so to speak. It was living. Chita lo chashuva. The fact that it's whole, but it's a whole kernel of wheat, is not considered whole, and therefore you would not get malkut. Now the Gemara, so we have two different possibilities here. So how do we resolve it? The Gemara answers, Tanya Kavatei Rabbi Yirmiyah. We have a braita that is synonymous with Rabbi Yirmiyah's understanding. Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shul Makkot. Rabbi Shimon says, even the smallest amount gives you malkut. You get lashes. Lo amru kizayit el enyin korban. The only time we ever said kizayit for achila is with regards to korban, because that's halakha Moshe Sinai. So what do we have? We have the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon would hold that even if you ate the tiniest amount of anything, not that's malkut worthy, you get lashes for it. The Chachamim hold you always have to have, in order to get lashes, you have to have always a kizayit, with one exception, that the object is whole and was a living object. Okay? Now let me add one more thing. Rashi said earlier that in order to be able to have that, to have the name of biriyah, of a living creature, it had to be that that ant was alive. Why does she say the word alive? Isn't the law of biriyah also true about a whole dead ant?
Maybe he doesn't hold by that.
What? But so why does Rashi say that? Why would he not hold by that? It is a whole biriyah. The Torah never obligated it to be alive. So some of the Mefarshim say, and this is back to our dehydration point, that when a bug dies, because it's so small, like imagine you stick a body in the ground. How long does it take to decompose? A few days, but not too long. You take something that's that small, right? The decomposition happens almost immediately. Why is dehydration not a whole biriyah? Because when you dry out the bug, you've taken part of the bug itself and you've gotten rid of it, which means it's no longer whole. Part of a human being, a bug, is the moisture, right, that's in its existence. You suck out that moisture by dehydration, what happens? Not only is it lacking the water that was in it, but a part of its actual, like our skin is part moisture, right? What happens when you dry your skin? It contracts. That means that there was more skin when it was wet. Does that make sense? Okay? So you're missing a part, however minuscule, of the bug when you dehydrate it. That's why they allow a special K has raspberries in it. Why is it mutar? Because dehydrated. Okay? When it's chopped up, why is it mutar? Because it's smushed. It's no longer whole. All right? So in that case, what would be the one case where we would not have that answer? Let's say you took raspberries, and you ground up a bunch of raspberries, right? If the ratio of bugs was so large, okay, that you'd be able to have a shiur of bugs, then that would still be a problem. Okay? So part of this is just relevant to the actual mitziyut on the ground, like to the actual scenarios that we're in. If you were able to create raspberries that were not infested, or even raspberries that had far less infestation, then raspberries would go back to being the same as any other fruit. If, let's say, we figured out a way to make strawberries not have bugs in them, or to make them have far less occurrences of bugs, like an apple, the halacha would be you'd be able to eat strawberries. Okay, it's just very hard to do. All right, בסדר. אוקיי. ברוך ה' לעולם. אמן ואמן.